Please give a warm welcome to Director of Product Management at Integrity 360, Brian Martin.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Delighted to be here for the first time in Stockholm, first time in Sweden. And I'd like to try something that Johanna did earlier. I want to ask a couple of questions from the audience. So, if you have seen the movie Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs, clap now. Okay, quite a few. And something else I'm quite curious about, very technical question. How many people, if you like meatballs, clap now? Okay, so it is true about Sweden and the national dish. So why am I talking about meatballs and Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs? Well, it served a little bit of inspiration for this talk. And this movie was published in 2009, and it's the story of a crazy inventor called Flint Lockwood, and he invented the Flint Lockwood diatonic super mutating dynamic food replicator, or the plasmidifer for short. And why is this interesting? Well, in effect, you can think of this as an on-premise appliance. He had it in his lab. He had good visibility of it. It was right in front of him. He could control the access, who could use the appliance. It was confined behind his perimeter, you know, where he was working. And it was quite secure. And he had a good understanding of the exposures to compromise of that device. But as with any on-premise device, it lacked scalability. You know, it could only do so much. It could only produce so much food. So this device could take water and convert it to nice food like cheeseburgers, meatballs, pizza. But he couldn't produce a whole lot of it. He had the hardware to think about. He had to put all the hardware together. He had to manage it. And only he could use it because it was in his environment. Nobody else could gain access to it. But then due to a series of mishaps, this device got projected up in the air into the clouds, and suddenly it became the cloud-based Flint Lockwood diatonic supermutating dynamic food replicator, which I like to call the plasmidifer, which is a nice handy term in case you need to refer to it. And because it was up there now, it scaled enormously. It was taking in, you know, whenever it got rainy, it took in an enormous amount of water, and it could produce an enormous amount of food. And for a while, all the residents of the village were delighted because it was raining cheeseburgers, it was raining pizzas, it was raining meatballs, and everybody was no longer hungry. However, things got a bit out of control, as you can see from this diagram, where ultimately you got bad events happening, such as tornadoes of spaghetti and such like. And in effect, it became a cloud-based application. So it suddenly had massive scalability, which is one of the big benefits of cloud. He was no longer looking after the hardware. It was just up there somewhere, and it seemed to work. It suddenly had a much wider accessibility because now everybody could bear the fruits of this application. And it had a lot of flexibility in units of production, bit like cloud. It could, you know, if it rained heavily, if there was lots of water, it could produce lots of food. If it had a small amount of water, it could produce a reduced amount of food. But now suddenly, he had no longer had visibility of the appliance. Suddenly, the attack surface, the way that device could be compromised was suddenly much greater because now, you know, there was, it could be accessed from any angle, and it was no longer hidden securely within the perimeter. It had effectively a lot more exposure to compromise. So I think you can see the analogy here that cloud brings enormous benefits, but as Johanna introduced, brings risks and exposures that need to be managed. So now I'm going to go on in this talk just to talk about cloud security, and how to think about it, to help you manage your cloud security. But to understand cloud security, we have to define what we mean by cloud, because how can you secure what you haven't defined? And the problem with cloud is that it's quite a nebulous thing, and people have different understandings. So I did some extensive research to get the best possible definition of cloud that I could find, and this is what I came up with. Cloud is anything that obscures or darkens something or causes gloom, trouble, or suspicion. So I hope that kind of resonates with people in terms of how they feel potentially about cloud. But to be serious, moving on, I do really want to help just break down what we mean by cloud, what we mean by cloud security. So I'm going to cover what are the main trends in cloud, what are the threats associated with cloud, what are the tools and technologies that can help us, and also not to forget the best practice security frameworks that equally apply to cloud, but maybe need to be applied in a slightly different way. So starting with cloud trends, as we all know, the shift to cloud just continues on and on. But just because cloud is everywhere doesn't mean we actually understand it, because it continues to evolve and it has many different aspects to it. We don't all have the same understanding. And there is, to be honest, a fair amount of technical understanding that's needed to actually get under the covers of what we mean by cloud. And there's all these different bits, SaaS, cloud-connected systems, public cloud, private cloud, web APIs. So how do we get our hands around all of this, and how do we secure it? And the definitions can help, but they can be confusing. So Gartner's definition here is quite clear, but it's also, how does that really help us? For a long time, we've thought about cloud as being that combination of infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, and software as a service. So that is not a bad starting point to at least think about some of the main components of cloud. There was a time when people said, "Oh, is cloud means not on-premise?" So anything that's not on-prem is cloud, right? The problem is we've also got private cloud. So it's that form of computing that's used by only one organization. So private cloud is providing compute and applications remotely from a private or rented data center. So I think it's better to think about cloud referring more to the means of access to central scalable resources than necessarily who owns that infrastructure, because a lot of the same security challenges apply for public and for private cloud. And also, given that so many organizations have a hybrid cloud where they want to apply policies both in private and public, we can't ignore the private cloud part of cloud security. And the other thing I would advise or like to say is that cloud security is not really separate from IT security anymore, because there's so much mass adoption of cloud. Effectively, IT security and cloud security is just part of IT security. And if you add up public cloud, private cloud, and SaaS, that is actually the majority of IT today. We know that cloud spending continues to increase. It will overtake traditional IT spending within the next 2 years. But don't forget that traditional spend also includes the private cloud. So therefore, in reality, we're already there in terms of cloud spending. And also to make the point that we used to think that cloud was going to be this great cost savings for us, because now we could rent and only use what we needed, and we could save a lot of investment and things like that. As you can see from the graph here, in spite of the cloud spending growing and growing, the traditional spending is also still increasing. So overall, the total spend is going up. So cloud is no longer really seen as it's not a cost driver for cloud. It's more about utility, scalability, and all those other benefits. And we're all using it. 65% of organizations are heavy users of cloud, and the rest are light to moderate. So it's in there in some shape or fashion within your organization. And it's not only single cloud, as I said, 87% of organizations are multi-cloud now, and 72% are hybrid, public and private. So when we think about cloud security, we don't have to just think about securing one cloud. We have to think about securing the hybrid private-public and also multi-cloud. So it could be Azure, AWS, GCP, and whatever other clouds we're using. All need to be secured, and it's really difficult to think about, oh, how do I secure all that, but I want to have the same security posture across these different types of clouds. So that's really important in your strategy to make sure you don't just do everything on a siloed basis across these different elements of cloud. On the SaaS side of the equation, the number of SaaS applications in use has absolutely exploded in recent years. The average organization is using 130 SaaS applications, of which IT has only visibility of approximately 1/3. And that's only going to grow. So the majority of organizations will be either majority SaaS applications. There might be a few traditional organizations who resist that move to SaaS, but even those traditional organizations will have a very significant chunk of applications that are used from a SaaS point of view. And I think the reason why IT is not getting all the visibility of all these SaaS applications is just the nature of SaaS. It's so easy to consume. There's our distributed budgets across the business, and somebody can switch on access to a SaaS application in 5 minutes. So hence the proliferation, but that brings obviously enormous risks as well. So that's just a quick dive into the trends we're seeing. Cloud is here to stay, and there are all these different aspects of cloud that we need to consider. So what are the main risks? So can we relax? Because this year, for the first time in 10 years, security is no longer the top concern of organizations moving to cloud, according to the latest research. So maybe security is not such a big problem anymore. Maybe we can relax and take a deck chair to the beach. Well, maybe not so quick, because yes, it is true that cloud spending has overtaken security as the top cloud adoption concern that organizations have. And it's no surprising when you see that rise of spend. It really is a thing that organizations now have to manage because it's becoming a huge component of cost within every organization. But security is still up there. Close to 80% of organizations still see security as a massive issue in relation to cloud. So we still need to make sure we think about that. And the problem with cloud, I think, is that it vastly increases the attack surface. Yes, it brings enormous scalability and accessibility of applications and workloads. However, that in itself then brings that exposure upwards and available should there be a vulnerability in an exposure. Here's some examples of exposures over the last year or so. And what you can see is just massive leakage of data, compromises. And the one that really jumps out at me, which always blows my mind, is the Shanghai, China police left a cloud management console open on the internet, and the data of 1 billion Chinese citizens was stolen. So one small exposure and absolutely enormous loss of data. And that's, you can see the two sides of the cloud coin, the power and the scalability, but then the exposure should things go wrong from a security point of view. I think we all remember Bill Clinton. He had a famous saying, which is, "It's the economy, stupid," kind of boiling things down to a simple, how do I win the election? Well, if Bill was in charge of cloud security, he would say, it's the configuration, stupid. And the reason he would say that is because the vast majority of cloud breaches happen due to customer user misconfiguration or mistake. And this is where the shared responsibility model of cloud comes in. We kind of think, oh, these great public cloud providers, they're sophisticated, they've got great security, so I don't need to worry. But as we all know, the shared responsibility model puts a lot of responsibility on the customer as well from a security point of view. And depending on which model of cloud you're using, If it's infrastructure, you've got a lot of responsibility around the virtual network, the OS, middleware, runtime applications, data, and the people and identities and security that Rich talked about. Even with SaaS, you might think, well, the SaaS application provider is doing most of the work. It's still your data going in there. You're responsible for that data. And the people that you give access and permissions to get into that data, that's still your responsibility. So for the foreseeable future, misconfiguration and mistakes on the user side is by far almost, but not quite exclusively, the cause of cloud-related breaches. And there are kind of two categories of cloud risk. There is the provider risk that I talked about, but failure is rare, particularly if you pick the top providers like Microsoft Azure, AWS, GCP. Yes, there are occasional failures, but in the main, they're quite secure. I think if you go down to tier 2, tier 3 providers, you might need to do more diligence. But failure is rare, and to be honest with you, it's not really within your control. You can't really do much about it. The usage risks, as I say, like maintaining security, configuring it, governing it, that's where the frequent failure is, and that's more within your control, and that's where the majority of your cloud security focus should be. The Cloud Security Alliance is one of the premier international bodies thinking about and looking at cloud security. And they ran some surveys last year, and they came up with their Pandemic 11, looking back over what are the key security issues and breaches that have occurred across a wide swathe of customers globally. And they came up with this list. But again, the key themes, what was the main theme that came across? It was misconfiguration, accidents, identities, credentials, all the things that we talked about in terms of the user responsibility. And then flipping over onto the SaaS application side, security is still the big security concern. 37% say securing SaaS applications is the biggest concern that they have. And according to this research, the top themes are relating to new and unauthorized SaaS applications, users misusing, not adhering to policies, sharing of sensitive data, and such like. Interestingly, managing spend is only 19%, and I'm wondering, is that because it was the IT people filling out these surveys, but they only control 1/3 of the spend because all of these other applications are all coming from different budgets, so that might be partially the reason there. So that's kind of a view of some of the risks and threats. Now looking at the tooling and making sense of the landscape. And the problem is that cloud is a bit of an alphabet soup of terms and acronyms that you have to get your head around and try and understand. And let's face it, it's very confusing. So I'm going to try and boil it down into making sense of this technology. And I think you can boil it down primarily to 4 areas. You need to secure access to the cloud, getting in and out. You need to secure the configuration of the cloud. It's the configuration stupid. You need to secure the workloads running in the cloud. And then the thing about cloud is there's a lot of cloud native development going on where applications are being pushed very quickly, deploying, in some cases daily, hourly updates of applications into the cloud. And so you can't wait for those applications to get into the cloud. You need to secure the cloud application development lifecycle so that those applications are as secure as possible before they even get deployed. And these are the 4 key areas of securing cloud and using the various tooling around that. So I'm just going to talk a bit about each of these areas. So in terms of securing cloud access, there is a big trend towards converging the different forms of access. And if you think about the 3 ways that people access the cloud, they access the internet, which is effectively one big dirty cloud, let's face it. And you're securing access to what you don't own yourself. And traditionally that's been delivered through secure web gateways and proxies. You've got access to SaaS applications, which is applications you rent. And traditionally that has been secured through CASBs. And then you've got access to applications you own that are in the cloud. in your data center or in IaaS. And traditionally that's been like VPN type access. There's a trend towards zero trust network access as a next generation of access. And the problem with this is lots of tooling involved. And the good news is these are converging together into an area called Security Service Edge. So a single cloud-based platform to secure the hybrid worker, no matter where they reside, in the office, at home, on the train, in the cafe, working with your clients. You've got one platform to secure these different forms of access in an integrated platform and solution. And not only does it give better security, then there's potentially a lot of less complexity to manage and therefore a lot less cost. SSE is like the security part of SASE, Secure Access Service Edge, which then when you combine it with software-defined networking, you get the SASE combined with SSE to give basically the modern secure networking environment. When you're actually securing cloud configuration, then you can look separately at IaaS, PaaS, and SaaS. And the big one here is Cloud Security Posture Management. That gives you visibility. So one of the themes today is visibility. It gives you visibility of your assets, security and compliance. It's helping to scan your infrastructure as code to make sure that people aren't configuring their environment anymore via UI on these cloud platforms. They're writing code, infrastructure as code, and then that's getting executed to make to set up the configuration of the cloud environment. So you don't want to wait until that code has executed and configured potentially a security vulnerability in your environment. It left a S3 bucket open to the internet, for example, or something like that. So infrastructure as code scanning is a key component of cloud security posture management to make sure you're actually doing that up front. And then you've got other forms of it, like Kubernetes security posture management. You've also got the cloud infrastructure entitlements management, which helps you cover all the entitlements of who's got access to what within the cloud environment. The good news is you don't have to remember all of this because there is convergence going on, bringing all these point solutions together to give a multi-cloud support, detection, visibility, and alerting and remediation all in one place. Similarly for SaaS, you've got now your SaaS security posture management, which also gives you visibility and reporting around your SaaS security settings, managing identity permissions, and helping with risk and comparison against industry frameworks and compliance against various standards, which is a more recent emerging category. But again, there are other tools out there to help manage SaaS. So you've got SaaS management platforms, and then you've also got what I talked about earlier, cloud access security brokers, which are integrating into SSE. And a lot of the SaaS security posture management is migrating and integrating and converging with those two other platform types that I've listed here. Then you also need to secure the workloads. So you've got your configuration, you've locked down permissions, accounts, the environment. The next step is to secure the workloads themselves, what's actually running in your environment. And it's a bit different from your traditional endpoint security because it's not just running on a OS like Windows or Linux. Yes, that might be the case, but you could be running in containers, in serverless workloads, virtual machines, all different forms of environment, and those themselves need to be secure. So it's more about securing the workload, implementing preventative controls, but also detecting anomalies and alerting on those so you can respond to them as well. So a lot of the similar things you would see in endpoint security have been applied in a cloud context as part of cloud workload protection. And then the last area, securing cloud application development. That's about shifting left in the development cycle to make sure that security is baked in up front. So you've got the concepts of SAST, static application security testing, where you're literally scanning the source code to see if your developers have put some security loopholes in the code. You're looking at software composition analysis. So what open source libraries or components are being used, And are there any vulnerabilities in existence in the makeup of those applications, dynamic testing of those applications before they get into production, full integration into the CI/CD pipeline so that you don't present security as a barrier to application development agility, because then the developers won't want to work with you from a security point of view if you don't make it very smooth. So all of these come together in terms of securing the app development, and bringing that all together, what you find is that, yes, I've talked about a lot of different technologies, a lot of different tools, but there's now too many of them. Most organizations are putting code into production at least weekly, and almost half of them daily. They struggle to identify the tools they need to do that securely, and they mostly say that this proliferation of tools creates blind spots between all these tools that are out there. But the good news is there is a whole emerging category called CNAPP, which is Cloud Native Application Protection Platforms. So everything, like I talked at the start about securing access to cloud, that sits within that Security Service Edge SSE space, and then which forms the security element of SASE. You've also, for the remainder of what I've talked about, securing the configuration, securing the workloads, securing the development lifecycle, that's now coming within this category called CNAPP, which combines the artifact scanning, the software, the secure software development, the cloud configuration, and the runtime cloud workload protection all together. And the beauty of this is that it's just one solution to manage and to utilize, but also the security gets better because the whole is better than the sum of its parts in terms of the context that's provided by the configuration feeding into the runtime awareness of the threats, for example. And this is a real trend. So by 2025, 60% of enterprises will consolidate CSPM and cloud workload protection. Most of the CSPM purchase will be part of an integrated CNAPP offering. And what we see as well is that cloud security spending growth is vastly outstripping the rest of growth within cloud security, or within security spending more generally, which means that cloud security is actually the fastest growing category of the security market. We even looking back to 2021, there was a massive. There's been a massive spike in terms of venture capital investment in CNAPP as compared to other forms of cloud security. So over 4 billion of investment compared to only 600 million the prior year. So CNAPP is where most of the investment has been going over the last few years, and that is now emerging into this. What we see now is the vendor landscape is that all the vendors who were sitting in the cloud workload protection area have now extended their offerings to offer a full CNAPP suite, if you like, within their offering. And I didn't want to finish without saying that it's not just about the technology, and that general security frameworks are equally applicable to cloud. But which frameworks do you use? Well, it depends where you're coming from. So if you're already using an existing framework, then many of them have cloud security aspects to them. So, for example, if you're certified for ISO 27001, or if that's your goal, then you have the 2717, which is the cloud interpretation of 27001. The CIS Top 18 Controls has the Cloud Companion Guide, which will help you interpret those for cloud. The CIS also has benchmarks for each of the public cloud providers, so you can see much more down to a detailed technical configuration level, how what they're advising for configuring your cloud to be secure against the controls. And for example, that's one of the services we offer, is to help customers benchmark for all the major cloud providers against those CIS benchmarks. The NIST cybersecurity framework has plenty of references to cloud, and more so for Ireland and UK, we've got Cyber Essentials Plus. If you're in the public sector, many national cybersecurity centres have advisories. So in Ireland, UK, and I tried to read the Swedish advice, but I couldn't couldn't understand it. But I have no doubt there are some reference in there as well to the cloud security. If you're a cloud native provider, then the Cloud Security Alliance is really the standard that a lot of cloud providers use for implementing the cloud controls matrix in order to have the right controls to really secure the service provider side of things if you are a cloud service provider or a SaaS application provider like that. And then if you've got non-sensitive data, or if you're a small business and don't have the need or the capacity for a very large heavyweight framework, then the Cloud Security Alliance has a light version, and there are other lighter versions of some of the frameworks I've mentioned already that are available for smaller organizations. So finally, there's the cloud provider specific frameworks. So Azure and AWS have their well-architected framework, which is not just about security, it's also about important concerns like spend and performance, but there are big elements of security in those frameworks that can be adopted. And GCP has their Google Cloud Framework. And as I mentioned, the CIS benchmarks are available and quite detailed for all of the cloud providers. So in summary, cloud security is IT security. It's not something different or separate. And if I had to summarize the recommendations, then I would start with, if you're not really sure where you are, get a cloud security assessment done just to benchmark where you are with your security. Make sure you think about and are aware of the full cloud security scope. So get a definition for what you mean and what's relevant from a cloud perspective in your environment: public cloud, private cloud, securing access to the cloud, getting a grip on SaaS usage and security, cloud configuration, controlling that cloud configuration, cloud security posture management, monitoring, maintaining the security of the workloads in the cloud, making sure that the software development lifecycle is secure and is built into your security controls, and think about an evolution towards this new world of cloud native application protection, to consider all those aspects. Don't forget about the controls frameworks. Their cloud is equally relevant to make sure you apply them in the right manner. And then finally, as with any security controls, you should be doing regular tests, and the cloud should be within the scope of your penetration testing and your controls testing as well, and shouldn't be left off the table. So that's me finished. So I hope that was useful, and happy to take any questions people might have. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Brian. And will you stick around throughout the day as well?
I'll be here all day.
Perfect. Do we have any questions for Brian? No, these are Swedes. They're eager for their coffee. They know it's a coffee break coming up. That's why. But thank you so much, Brian. And don't hesitate to grab hold of him if you have any questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.